Hello and good morning, everybody. Thank you for watching. I'm Matt Reardon. We have a big storm system to talk about today. It's potent. We're looking at the mosaic radar across the U.S. right now. This is just a whole view of the continental U.S., and it's a deep storm system. It's getting stronger now. You can kind of see that visually just looking at the screen here, and there's a lot going on in this forecast. Both severe thunderstorms that we'll have to talk about today. Storm Prediction Center going with a 5 out of 5 risk for severe thunderstorms, their highest category of risk here. You can see that in pink anywhere from the far southern tip of Illinois down through portions of northeastern Arkansas, even including the Memphis metro area as well. We'll have to talk about that. There's other areas kind of beyond that we're concerned about. If we just jump back and you look at that radar presentation, we can already see a line of severe storms. They are severe thunderstorm warned here as of this morning. About 6 a.m. Central Time when we record these videos. I mean, usually the cadence is we're talking about severe weather ingredients materializing, 6, 7, 8 hours later. But with the storm system this potent, we're seeing that come together already here this morning, and it's really persisted some activity overnight as well. So we'll talk about that in a few slides here. Another thing we have to mention, and this could end up being the more, if you will, historically significant aspect of this, is the flooding risk. So we have the high risk for severe thunderstorms today. And unfortunately, a very similar area, almost strikingly similar, has a high risk for excessive rainfall and flooding impacts. And that is really going to unfold more slowly, at least relative to the severe thunderstorm threat, over Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday, unfortunately, over this weekend, particularly where that Ohio River Valley meets the middle Mississippi River Valley, right in there. See some of the forecast totals from the WPC, which tends to be a little bit more conservative on the rainfall estimates, anywhere from 7, 8 to 9 inches right now, topping out maybe 10 inches in western Kentucky. But some of the modeled forecast, and it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that some precipitation values and amounts here end up 14, 15 inches. I can't rule out some localized areas going even above that. As we transition into next week, we've kind of been talking about this pattern flip. Eric's been mentioning that next week we're seeing dry weather come in and persist. We've seen that continue on some of the model trends here. If we just quickly look at the ECMWF ensemble, took it out to the 4 to 10 day precipitation anomaly forecast that still contains some of that weekend precip that we're seeing move through and move east here at the end of this week, kind of into this weekend. That's that green swath you can see here over portions of the eastern U.S. But behind that, much of the continental U.S., including the eastern U.S., and at least that kind of 5 to 10 day forecast period will be drying out, which I think is good news for folks dealing with some severe inclement weather, flooding over the next 72 hours here. Now, associated with that drier pattern shift is cold temperatures. This is something Eric touched on yesterday. We're continuing to see that in the models here this morning. The National Weather Service, their low temperature forecast early next week, showing the potential for a decent freeze event through the Midwest, potentially sneaking into the Mid-South as well. Some of the modeled temperatures, that is not what you're seeing here from the National Weather Service, we'll look at this in a bit, even have that freezing line extending more so toward Tennessee and areas to the east and west of that. So we'll look at that. If we jump back, kind of reorient ourselves here this morning, this low pressure system that we're watching, it's spinning up here somewhere in western Iowa, maybe northeast Nebraska here. We're seeing this snow event develop on the north side of that. We'll talk about that in a second. We've watched these thunderstorms kind of percolate out ahead of the system overnight, bringing rain showers, thunder, perhaps some pea-sized hail to areas in Illinois, Indiana as well, where that coverage is increasing here this morning. Really kind of all eyes right now in terms of this morning forecast are on this line of severe thunderstorms moving through Missouri, southeast Kansas into Oklahoma. And if we actually zoom in here, it's kind of neat. You can see this line unzipping, if you will, along this front here, as the storm system's now moving east. And if you look closely over the last few frames here, you can see them trying to kind of break up. I don't know if you see that. They're getting more broken. Now, typically as these lines head east into the morning, the sun comes up and they actually weaken a bit. So we'll be watching that closely. If they continue to weaken into Arkansas and Missouri, that might decrease the immediate severe threat in terms of, between 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. Central Time. But I think if they break up enough, some sun moves in ahead of them, really kind of the main event is later when we see perhaps new thunderstorms materialize out of this kind of broken line, the broken modified front associated with that. So it's not that this is kind of the main event. This line will likely weaken through this morning. But despite saying that, if we look at the all hazards map here, We actually have some severe thunderstorm warnings, almost all the way along the line. A tornado watch out ahead of that. We even have a tornado warning on the Kansas-Oklahoma border here, at least valid as of 5:30 this morning. Now, by the time this video gets recorded, that tornado warning's likely expired. In fact, just that last update, it's expired now, but those warnings are still active. If we look at the rest of this map, you see in green there, all the flood watches posted anywhere from Detroit, Michigan, down through the Ohio River Valley, Kentucky, Illinois, etc., even including the Texarkana area in northeast Texas. Wide area of heavy rainfall. I kind of mentioned, the biggest concern likely in this pocket here between maybe Owensboro, Kentucky, and Memphis. But really kind of a large area here to see quite a bit of what we'll call training thunderstorms. That is, in the forecast, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days in a row of showers and thunderstorms on and off. And that's how you get these big rainfall events over time. If we look to the north, can see winter storm warnings posted for the upper Midwest. We saw that snowfall materializing just back on the mosaic radar here. Jump back and see the winter weather advisories beyond that, and then including a little bit of ice concerns as well, like we've seen here over recent weeks. The reason for the storm system, why it's so potent, well, it's what we're looking at here. This is 500 millibars. We're looking well above our heads here, closer to the jet stream. And just how quick these winds are moving in, those jet stream level winds. This is at 500 millibars, but if I take you up to those jet stream level winds, you can see how fast they're flowing and really kind of peaking here over the southern plains. Kind of right along the nose of these winds is where those severe thunderstorms are firing right now in parts of Oklahoma and Kansas. And that's going to be ushering not only this low pressure system further toward the northeast, but it's bringing in that wind shear as we go through the day today. And we'll look at that in just a second here. Now, if I take you back over the northeast Pacific here, what's kind of neat is this block that we've been talking about in the North Pacific, where we have this low, this trough beneath this upper level ridge here in the Gulf of Alaska. This has allowed a lot of this troughing here across the western U.S. It's the reason over the last kind of 2 to 3 weeks we've been talking about a lot of these severe weather events. Now, we'll get into the forecast in a bit here. You saw that next week looks quite a bit different than what we've been seeing in these recent weeks. In late March, some of these big storm systems, the dust storms that we've talked about, severe thunderstorms, etc. We're actually finally seeing, I think, the end to this block. It's kind of ushering a new pattern here, and it's part of the reason that the predictability, I think, of the forecast in April has gone down. So we will talk about that in just the last few slides of this video. I want to take you back quickly to yesterday, because as much as this event feels like it's beginning today, it really began yesterday for parts of the central and eastern U.S. with some severe thunderstorm reports, hail and wind in the central and southern plains here, a few tornado reports as well in Kansas. Kind of curiously, have a tornado report here in far northeastern Iowa, actually up near Yellowstone. It's interesting to see that underneath the trough there. But this event really began last night. We can see this morning, which is kind of the handoff to the new day, watching those severe thunderstorms move to the east. Now I'm going to jump over. This is the HER forecast, the simulated radar. I'm going to make this valid here this morning. I'm guessing we're still at the 6C. That is the case. And you notice that the HER did pretty well with its forecast. If I make this valid for 6 a.m. about the recording of this video, you can see it has that increasingly broken line of thunderstorms from Oklahoma up into Missouri. I'm going to take this forward. You see those thunderstorms over Indiana. The snow is starting to materialize in the upper Midwest here. Again, this is just the radar, so it's not going to show you, snow versus rainfall here. So take this forecast at 10 a.m. and then 11 a.m. You can see those showers and thunderstorms continuing to push east, potentially still severe at this point before lunchtime. By noon, overspreading portions of Illinois, central and northern Illinois. 1 p.m., 2 p.m. now getting into portions of Indiana, Chicago metro area. But that line kind of staying back further to the west here over Missouri and Arkansas before 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m. kind of reinitiating new thunderstorm development along kind of the leading edge of what might be a modified outflow boundary, kind of a modified front here. And it's kind of this reinitiation of activity here that's probably the primary concern, at least for tornado threat. Now, further to the north, there's certainly this wind and hail threat. There's a tornado threat on some of these storms here earlier in the day that we can't rule out. But I think the earlier these storms come through, the more that will be really more of a wind and hail threat. With the tornado threat likely more so in the afternoon hours. Now, this is just the HER model run. You can see by 8 p.m., we have a line of probably significantly severe storms, a broken line anywhere between Indianapolis, Indiana, all the way through southern Arkansas, even getting into portions of northeast Texas. And you could have all sorts of hazards along this line. That is hail, wind. We could see kind of what we'll call this QLCS tornado threat, where embedded in a strong line of thunderstorms, you have these little spin-ups, and those can produce significant tornadoes, especially after sunset. When they can spin up very quickly. We've seen those cause damage and unfortunately injuries in the past, even up to EF3 strength. So those should not be discounted if this scenario from the HRRR comes true. Now the NAM forecast, which has actually done a little bit better in recent weeks here, I think has a bit better handle on this forecast here today, kind of consistent with its performance in late March. Notice at 6 a.m., I think it more accurately depicts that persistent kind of unzipping line that we just talked about. As we take this into 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., you can see those storms weakening kind of quicker than the HRRR forecasted them. And if we just look at those last few frames from the radar earlier, we see that matches up a little bit better. We saw those storms starting to break up a bit, expecting that weakening going into the morning hours. The NAM is consistent with that. And that changes the forecast a little bit because it allows new storms, it gives them more room to form out ahead of it. So by 2 p.m., we're seeing more discrete storms form across Illinois, likely with the hail and wind threat. Again, can't rule out that tornado threat across portions of Illinois and Indiana. It's just relatively less than the magnitude of it further to the south across the Ohio River Valley and Mississippi River Valley. So you go through 4 p.m. Now 5 p.m. can actually see a second line of storms along the front here developing in northern Illinois as those out ahead of it persist in through northern Indiana, getting toward Ohio. As we get into this evening, though, there's that reinitiation of storms here in portions of Arkansas, the boot heel of Missouri, southern Illinois. And unfortunately, the NAM has a little bit more discrete development. And what I mean by that is it's still kind of this broken line, but there's more gaps in it. And I would think that would increase the tornado threat. And given that kind of the NAM has had a better handle on things, I think, this is part of the reason why we're so concerned here today about the severe weather. The reason that there's this high risk out from the Storm Prediction Center in this area here in western Tennessee, the Boot Heel, Missouri, eastern Arkansas, western Kentucky, really kind of a wide area of severe weather concern today. This is 9 p.m. tonight, but this will persist overnight, even into midnight, now pushing into Ohio. That second line of storms now pushing through central Illinois into central Indiana. Again, midnight central tonight. And additional storms now moving through the Memphis metro area on the back side of this. If I take this forecast out and through Thursday, and then Thursday evening, you'll notice a very similar area seeing continued severe thunderstorm development on Thursday and actually all the way into Friday morning. Now, the severe threat will likely be lower on Thursday and Friday respectively, but thunderstorms trending over the same area that we just extensively talked about today in the forecast. Now you're starting to see that flood threat quickly take over the severe weather threat. The reason we're talking about severe weather to begin with is, we finally have quite a bit of moisture pushing up into the central U.S. If I make this forecast from the ECMWF valid here as of 7 a.m. this morning, this is the dew point forecast. See above 60-degree dew points now up through Texas, getting into Missouri, through central Illinois. See that kind of line here, this moisture return from the Gulf. If I take this out into the forecast at 1 p.m. now, today you can see those dew points increasing all the way up through northern Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, up near 66, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and Memphis, 70 further south, and then just kind of continuing to pulse north even into 7 p.m. tonight as that line of storms comes through and is greeted with that rich Gulf moisture. Another way we can measure this is CAPE. That is instability that's available for these thunderstorms to fuel them and grow them. And what we're seeing right now is that kind of prime time for this event this evening, that those values will be over about 1,500 to 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE. That is certainly above the threshold that needs to be met for severe thunderstorm development. And you can kind of see that in that orange hue here. And you can see that being met really from a line through southern Illinois, southern Indiana, down through that whole risk area that we just talked about. Now, if you want perfect ingredients for a large severe setup like the one we're talking about, you're going to put instability, high CAPE like we just talked about, underneath a tremendous amount of wind shear. And if we just kind of look up here at about a mile above our heads here, I made this valid. Let's make this valid for this afternoon. Make this valid for Friday afternoon. So this is just a mile above our heads here. And you can see how fast what we call the low-level jet are screaming over that same risk area that we just talked about. If we look at the surface down below that, now we know those winds are going to be out of the south, bringing those dew points in the middle Mississippi Valley. But if you just look just above that, again, a mile above our heads here this afternoon across portions of the Mississippi River Valley, go up to 850. Look at how much quicker those winds are moving. There's your low-level wind shear. So we have winds out of the south, anywhere 10 to 15 knots, bringing that warm, moist air up. But we go just a bit above and you have winds, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour above that. That's a tremendous amount of low level wind shear, which is exactly what we're looking for as a huge ingredient for some of these bigger tornado events. Now, if we look even above that, the jet stream level winds, you'll see very impressive winds. We just talked about these to kind of start the video, flowing less from south to north, more from west to east. So you can think at the surface, you have winds like this. Just above, you have winds like that, much stronger. And then winds in the more upper levels of the atmosphere, kind of out of the west to east. And that's completing your kind of textbook hodograph is what we sometimes call them, but really just kind of showing you and showcasing the wind shear that these storms will have available to them. That is how they're going to spin. And it's spinning thunderstorms that are going to be our biggest concern in the spring and summer season in terms of severe weather. It's why the Storm Prediction Center has a large moderate risk out for much of the middle Mississippi River Valley, portions of the Ohio River Valley, and we see this enhanced and slight extending over a farther area. And of course, kind of all eyes on the Delta area, or the northern Delta area and middle Mississippi River Valley underneath that high risk. Now, I do want to show a little bit of that snowfall event. So we just talked about the storm systems more across the middle part of the country. If you look into the upper Midwest, this forecast valid as of this afternoon, 4 p.m. Wednesday. See that snowfall event and potentially some ice across portions of the upper Michigan. Snowfall event kind of ending tonight. You can see those winter storm warnings that we were talking about valid for portions of Minnesota and the far eastern Dakotas as well. And I take this forecast, we talked about this earlier. If I take it into Friday morning, you can see those storm systems training again over the same area as we go into Thursday and then Friday. There will be a potential severe weather threat associated with some of these as well. Again, comparatively less. But a big story really kind of following here is that Friday into Saturday, finally seeing some precipitation, likely precipitation, I can safely add here, get into portions of the southern high plains, even kind of up onto the Cap Rock, which has seen very little precipitation, even going back to October and November of 2024 is how far you have to go back to find even anything close to a 1-inch rain event for a pretty wide area here in portions of the southern high plains, getting into the southern plains as well. So seeing more persistent rain chances, I think Friday and Saturday. That forecast, that high resolution one from the NAM, ended kind of right there on Friday morning. So I'm going to take this over. We'll go 7 a.m. Friday. Here's the ECMWF precipitation forecast. We'll do the handoff from the NAM to the ECMWF this way. See pretty similar precipitation. Again, that area here across the Mid-South where we're worried about training thunderstorms and increasing flood threat. But with that system spinning up here in the southern high plains, you can see from really much of the day Friday, even into Friday evening and now into early Saturday morning, persistent rain chances, and then they're shifting over to snowfall, potentially. Kind of curious how much snow we actually get out of this. But at this point, probably take the moisture here in portions of West Texas, eastern New Mexico. See now another low pressure system developing in eastern Oklahoma. This is Saturday afternoon. And again, it's a broken record. More rainfall. We talked about it Thursday and Friday. Now we're into Saturday afternoon, likely looking at severe weather potentially associated with this. The storm system now moving through the Ohio River Valley. This is Sunday afternoon, finally exiting further off to the southeast, the Carolina Plains. And then by Tuesday afternoon, we really have much of the continental U.S. now clear, precipitation safe for some areas in Maine and the Pacific Northwest. Now, if I take this forecast into Wednesday and Thursday, you can see a potential low pressure system here spin up over the Midwest. But really, this is getting pretty far out into the forecast all the way out to Friday, the 11th. I mentioned that severe storm threat potential as we go into tomorrow, Thursday. You can see that outlook here from the Storm Prediction Center. This one valid as of Thursday as we get more so into the afternoon. Again, kind of over that same area. Take this forecast into Friday. Again, a little bit more so to the west over portions of North Texas. Again, that same area where there's that significant flooding concern. And then as we go into the day on Saturday, a little bit more so over portions of the southeast, that is southern Arkansas, Louisiana, much of Mississippi here, but even extending right up again into the Mid-South, portions of western Kentucky, Tennessee, even perhaps sneaking up into the Ohio River Valley as well. Now, as we go into next week, we want to look at the trough ridge pattern. This is from the ECMWF, and I'm going to take this forecast out, and we'll look at this Friday. We'll take it to Friday afternoon, and the reason that we're finally talking about precipitation in the southern high plains is because we've seen a lot of these troughs move through. We've seen the severe weather associated with each of them, but they've come through quickly. There's been this kind of urgent activity from the jet stream out of the Pacific, and it's ushered these troughs quickly through. Now that has helped bring dust storms through. It's helped enhance some of the severe weather risks associated with these. But this large upper level ridge that we've been talking about of the Pacific finally breaking, this wave break event, it's allowed one of these troughs to finally cut off a bit. And what I mean by that is it's kind of disconnected from the jet stream level flow to the north that's more so up into Canada. It's allowing this to finally spin. What I mean by that is do a full kind of revolution where it's able to back the winds around out of the southeast over New Mexico, over North Texas, and pull in some of this Gulf moisture and actually produce precipitation here. So it's really kind of the breaking down of the very same pattern that we've seen, just finally allowing that precipitation in there. So I take this forecast in through Saturday and Sunday. You'll see that ridge moving more so over the western U.S. It actually re-intensifies early next week. We see troughing over the eastern U.S. that's prompting the frost risk that we'll talk about in just a second here. So we get into Thursday, April 10th. So that ridge strength, kind of re-strengthening, if you will, over the western U.S. Again, additional troughing late next week, but potentially getting into the end of next work week, this warmth trying to push back over the central U.S. And you have to consider that we will have been dry for much of the central and eastern U.S. over this stretch here into the early next work week. If we start to get warm on top of that, at least in certain areas here across parts of the middle U.S., the Corn Belt, could see planting windows open up very quickly. Now, it's getting out in the forecast, but it does have that potential with how dry we will be, and then potentially with the warmth after that. In terms of those rainfall amounts in the southern high plains here, a wide area here looking at over half an inch of rainfall. This is from the more conservative WPC area. You can see some localized area in here is likely getting over an inch. I just talked about the soil moisture and soil temperature conversation, at least in terms of plant. I'm picking on Bloomington, Illinois. I just kind of picked a central spot here between Iowa, Indiana, and Illinois. Temperatures right now falling into early next week. We talked about the cold and frost chances getting out into the kind of early to middle of the next work week. We can see kind of hints of warming up here. Now, soil moisture is on here in these blue bars here. This is 4-inch soil moisture, and you can see that increasing this weekend ever so slightly. I know it's hard to see on this plot, but starts to decrease on the getting on into the late next work week. And if we see that kind of divergence here where soil moistures are dropping, temperatures are increasing, lack of rainfall events, you could see plant begin, I think, in a big way across much of the central U.S. and parts of the Corn Belt. Want to look at model temperatures early next week. We kind of took a hint at this with the National Weather Service layer low forecast. I'm going to take this out to, let's do Monday morning at 7 a.m. You can see that freezing line getting in now to the Midwest. If I take it into 7 a.m. Tuesday, you can see the stretching all the way getting to Arkansas, maybe even northern Tennessee here, up into Virginia, parts of Pennsylvania. But some of these model temperatures, these are low. They're getting out into hard freeze territory. 25 degrees Champaign, 26 Indianapolis, 23 in Des Moines. And this is actually persisting on Wednesday morning. Some of these same areas still below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and that freezing line, again, trying to sneak almost all the way into Alabama, Georgia, can't rule out northern Mississippi. The ECMWF, the model I'm showing you here, can be too aggressive on these overnight low temperatures at times. The National Weather Service kind of smartly moving that freezing line north for now, not going as deep on the low temperature forecast for now, but the potential is there. It's worth mentioning as we get out into Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week. Climate Prediction Center has much of the eastern U.S. in that lower than average temperature contour for next work week. This is April 7th through the 11th. And with that ridge moving in out west, you can see all the warmth here. Could maybe even crack into the kind of mid to upper 90s in portions of California. Can't rule out, maybe a triple digit. Be very early for that. 6 to 10 day precipitation outlook. We talked about the dry weather. Again, just the last kind of remnants of all the persistent activity we talked about at the end of the weekend, getting into this forecast here for the east, but otherwise for much of the continental U.S. looking drier next week. If we shift this forecast out, the 8 to 14 day outlook kind of getting almost into next week, and at this point the middle of April, seeing that warmth persist out west. We saw how that ridge kind of re-intensified in the next work week, but it's starting to push further east. That cold contour now moving more so toward the southeast than it was in the 6 to 10 day outlook. And if this warmth continues to move east, could open up again this kind of window in mid-April before the precipitation picks back up again. We talked about this kind of week on, week off in April. Still seeing that in the models here this morning. 8 to 14 day precipitation outlook shows that dry area kind of persisting across much of the country right now. If I take the ECMWF forecast, this is from the ensemble looking at that trough ridge pattern. Kind of talked about the next work week, that re-intensification of the ridge in the western U.S. This is Thursday the 10th. If I take this into the 11th, And then Sunday the 12th out into the next weekend, you can see that ridge trying to move over the central U.S. Again, this would finally bring warm temperatures and dry temperatures, not cold temperatures and dry temperatures, not cold temperatures and dry conditions. It would bring warm temperatures and dry conditions, again, increasing the favorability for field work over kind of a wide area here, getting out into the next work weekend. Early in the forecast to say that with too much confidence, but it is there in some of the long-range models. But these windows, they never stay open forever. We don't necessarily want them to. And even by the next work, we get this point getting way out in here, almost like a thought experiment. You see flow starting to get back into the central U.S., potentially precipitation picking back up in this area here as well. Looking to the MJO as a guide, it's typically very active this time of year in kind of March and April, but we're not seeing it too active right now. Kind of living in null space here over in phases 6, 7, and 8, trying to use it as a guide here, kind of at least as an analog. Looking back to history, would say that the troughing in the western U.S. will persist later in April. If we look at some of the analogs here, can see that if we are in phase 8, like this forecast from the ECMWF suggests, kind of sneaking through null space, some of these models trying to get into phase 8 at the end of April, we could see a return to this troughing across the western U.S., more activity in the central U.S. in terms of severe weather and precipitation, but we're not seeing that in the near-term forecast. We're not seeing that next week, so we're maybe waiting for that pattern to emerge later in April. And that's kind of consistent with the week-on, week-off pattern that we're seeing develop. ECMWF weeklies have suggested that as well. I'll show you, jump over here and show you the 7-day forecast. We'll take this out kind of through the month of April here. Obviously very wet for portions of the middle Mississippi River Valley extending into the Ohio River Valley. As I take this into mid-April, you're quickly going to see that dry forecast now dominating across the continental U.S. As we go to the third week here, remember we just talked about the potential for reopening up the flow here and getting more severe weather and potentially precipitation chances here across the central U.S., maybe even backing up here into the southern plains as well. I'll be watching that closely. How far west can we keep some of this precipitation? Was this just kind of an anomalous event because of this big anomalous wave break that we had over the eastern Pacific, or are we going to get more flow, getting this Gulf moisture back up into what's really kind of the tornado alley proper when we think about it? Take this to the end of April and kind of get through that last week and see it maybe going over dry again. Again, not a strong signal. I'm just kind of curious to see that week on, week off pattern. Precipitation wise, let's see if I can jump over and show you the same forecast. We'll do that 7-day window. We'll take this in through the next work week here. You can see those cold temperatures persisting in the east. This lines up with that Climate Prediction Center forecast that we just showed. As we get out into that middle of April, you can see the warmth trying to push into the central U.S. here. It doesn't do it wholesale. You can see these lingering cold temperatures here through the third week of April, but that warmth potentially pushing back in toward the end of the month as well. Now, what I think might be happening, this is just a guess, that some of the cold here is overlapping some of this very anomalous rainfall that we're seeing early in the forecast period, which we just talked about, all the flooding potential over portions of the kind of the Tennessee River Valley, the Ohio River Valley as well. I'm going to take this forecast back. And this is a lot of water getting into the surface here, and the model's juggling all of this, and I do wonder to what extent that's playing in that kind of it's hanging on to that cold signature through the middle and then the third week in April. And I would say, intuition would say this warmth is going to likely spread further to the east at some point in the middle of April, maybe even kind of in through the end of the next work week, into that very next work week, that is kind of April 13th, 14th, and 15th, which is the same time period that the ECMWF weekly stay cold. So I'm not kind of buying this right now. I think there might be something going on with all the precipitation there. I can't say that for sure, but something I'm keeping an eye on here. I'm definitely not have a high forecast confidence on that forecast there. Curiously, kind of another thing we're seeing is in the upper level heights, the forecast from ECMWF weeklies, we're looking down on the northern hemisphere, the North Pole region. The forecast for kind of late April show all these kind of anomalous upper level heights here over portions of North America, Canada, even getting into portions of Siberia. Now we do see this at times, but it's even a little bit more aggressive here in this forecast, which kind of extrapolating that could yield some frost and freeze risk in some of these further south areas here, maybe over portions of Europe. If that kind of persists over North America as well, could see frost and freeze risk potentially in April. Again, not a huge signal, but something I'm keeping an eye on in late April for now. We'll be watching that and how this kind of marries up with what we saw with that strange cold bias in the eastern U.S. as well, in kind of the middle to third week of April. We'll talk about that more tomorrow on Thursday and Friday. Some of these models develop here, and then we'll have the new ECMWF seasonal model to talk about at the beginning of next week. Thanks for watching here this morning. Stay safe with the severe weather today and then the flooding after that. And we'll welcome in a much calmer, albeit relatively cooler week next week. I'll see y'all tomorrow.